Welcome back. I'm GTGD and this is video 5 and I'm gonna set up the player, the Navmesh, and the camera. And what we'll be able to do at the end of this video is to click anywhere in the world and the player will be able to walk there if it's a valid location. Okay, so I guess the first thing is to set up the player, and I'll just pretty much just grab the player sprite right here and just drag him into the hierarchy. Okay, so that's our player brought in to the scene. What I'll add to the player is a Navmesh agent, but just thinking about it, I need to set up the order in layer, just set it to the correct number. So if, for example, so I'm using this translate tool right here, so I can then move the player sprite. So that's the player sprite into the world. If I just move him over, you can see what's going to happen. It's not right. He's going to appear behind the brick wall and he's behind the floor and stuff. And that's just because, our construction layer is number 2. So 0 is behind 2, so obviously he's going to appear behind. So if I set this now to 3, the player is now going to appear in front. So that's correct. Let me just reset that X position back to 0. So that's pretty good. Now I'm going to add a nav, just search for Navmesh agent component. Okay, so that's pretty good. That's the first step. So he needs a Navmesh agent component to be able to interact with a Navmesh. Well, we don't have a Navmesh at the moment. We can set up the agent's height and stuff here, and we can also do it on the Navmesh component that we're going to create. Now select these 3 tile maps that have the colliders, all of the ones that have the colliders, and we're going to add a Navmesh modifier component. So without that, when we create our Navmesh, the game object with the Navmesh 2D surface on it, it's not going to have any idea what it's supposed to work with. So this is how we tell it what to work with. So we've added to all of these 3 layers. I just shift selected them. I'll just put override area, and they're not walkable. It's not walkable. So that what this will say is that wherever there's a collider, like these walls on these tile maps, these are not walkable. So tell the Navmesh system that they're not walkable. Okay, that's that pretty much done. And of course, agent types. Well, we only have one agent type. That's the humanoid. You can create different agent types. You can bake nav meshes for each agent type, so then bigger ones can't walk through the same area. So if you had a big character, it might not be able to fit through the door, for example, you'd bake a separate nav mesh for that character. Now I'm just going to create an empty game object here. I'll just reset its position. I'm just going to call it like nav mesh. The name doesn't matter, but that's for me, so I understand. I'm going to add a nav mesh surface 2D component. And now I will set up the agent height, and I also need to, it's telling me here to set the rotation to -90. It's just a requirement of the system. It says that in the manual as well. By the way, the manual is here for Navmesh Plus, and it's easy to follow manual, nicely written. I'm just going to set that to -90 because it's telling me to do that. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And for the agent, currently the agent will be too big, so 0.5 radius is too big. It'll not allow them, when the Navmesh bakes, it'll probably be too, it probably won't be able to fit through the door. That's what I'm trying to say. So I'm just going to set the radius down to like 0.3, and I think that should do it. Now if I bake, it has baked the Navmesh in blue, right? Wherever it is blue, it's walkable. But this isn't right. The floor inside here should be blue. The pathway through the door should be blue. And that is because if we go back to our here, well, it is open right now. Just bring the tile palette down as well so I can see things a bit better. It's using geometry to help it build the nav mesh. I don't want it to do that. I've actually got colliders in the game. So at the moment, it is actually taking every single sprite on those tile map layers and treating them as a collider. So everything on the mountain layer, everything on the construction layer is an obstruction to the player. That's what it's saying. That's not correct. I need the player to walk through the field and stuff. So if you are avoiding using too many colliders and you had a different game setup and stuff, that would actually be pretty smart. In that way you could just use the geometry there and you didn't have any colliders and it would just work, which is neat. But that's not our case. Our case is physics colliders. So now if I bake that again, great. Now I can see it's all walkable. Fantastic. And only the mountains are not, the hills are, and that's what I want. Perfect. Okay. Obviously, it's not going to work. So if I hit just hit play here, and I took off maximize on play earlier, and the player disappeared too. Oh boy. So they fell through or something like that. Oh, it's telling me Visual Studio package version 2.011 available. Let me go to the package manager and see what that is. So in case you saw something like that, it's not something to panic about. Everything is still working. So it's a Unity registry thing, and it's talking about this Visual Studio editor. There's an up arrow saying that it can be upgraded. So I'll get back to it. I'll do it later after the video. I'll come and update it. For now, I won't worry because I don't want to waste any time on that. And the next thing to do is we're going to actually create our script so that well, the player can do something and we can actually interact with the world. So I'm going to just first make a folder. I'm just going to call it like scripts. Inside of it, I will create a new C# script and I'm going to call it player_mover. And this is just my terminology. I just like to, if I know it's going to be attached to a particular game object, I just like to call it by the name of that game object, and then I put underscore its purpose, whatever. That's just what I like to do. I mean, you don't have to do that. Okay, so let's just open up Visual Studio and get to work. Okay, so this is our very first script that we're going to work on. You see it's separated in a couple of different ways. I mean, the way it looks. So you have up here, you have these using statements, and these, we need them because they allow us to access inside of that, basically like a library, and get code from there that we can use. So the bits of the API, so bits of, I guess, how would you say it? I mean, I'm not technical in this, so I'll just say it in a simple way. Inside of there are all sorts of tools that I need and that are useful to me, and that's why I put that statement in there. But I need to go further because I'm dealing with the Navmesh system, and in Unity it's called the AI system. So I need to say using Unity engine.ai. Otherwise I won't be able to do any of that sort of Navmesh code, because the very first thing I want to do is, and then we have the class, and it's inside of this that we have our instructions for actually executing. So it's inside of the class. You write it inside of the class. You can create a class within a class as well, and that's how you can create your own variables and stuff. So we're going to now set up a variable, and we're going to call it public Navmesh agent. I'm just going to call it player agent. And this is a variable of the type, it's a reference. It's a reference type. I want it to hold a reference to the player. So for example, I can now jump back into here, into Unity, let it compile, go to the player component, to the player itself, and drop in the player mover. And there we go. That's our script there. And there's a reference, player agent. And it's wanting a component type of Navmesh agent. And I can just drag the player again, drop that in. And what it's referring to is this very component here, because I'm going to make use of it. I'm going to send it instructions. So I've just stored a reference to it now on the script. So going back to the script, let's make it do some stuff. The very first thing we need to do actually is for the 2D Navmesh, we need to set some parameters as mentioned in the manual for Navmesh Plus. There's some things that we need to set in the start method when we start the game to stop the player from disappearing. That you saw the player disappear there. I don't want that to happen, so let's correct that. And what I'm going to do is to just write my own method. And the way it is, you just have to use the word void. Then you can say fixed rotation 2D. Now, as correction, you don't have to use the word void. You could actually create methods that have a type in them, and they'll return. They can process something and return it of that type. So it could be an integer, so an int. It could be a string, whatever. So fixed rotation. But this one is not returning anything. It's going to carry out some instructions, and that's pretty much it. It's grayed out because nothing is calling it. So Visual Studio is telling me that nothing is actually calling this method, and a method is basically something that will run your code. So it's a box, and you're basically putting your instructions in there, and then you assign that box somewhere, and it's going to get called up, and the instructions are going to run. And these are also methods. You got here an update method and a start method. These are default Unity methods. They are inbuilt to the mono behavior. So you can see our class, this file name that we created, it derives from something called mono behavior. And this is an enormous class built by Unity that contains all of the Unity API and whatnot for game objects, basically. So there's tons of code behind that. And these are coming from, they run because of that. What start method means is that when you launch your game, the moment it starts basically your game, that code will run. So when this script is initialized in the game, it's going to run that code. There is a method earlier than even start. It's called awake. You even have other methods which we'll use actually, like on enable, on disable. So if the script is enabled or the script is disabled, then those methods are run at that time. So there are other inbuilt Unity methods that will be executed automatically. There's an update method as well. This is a pretty important method, and it's basically saying every frame. So update is called every frame if the mono behavior is enabled. So yeah, that's basically what you need to do constant checking for things like, is the player pressing the mouse button? Are they pressing a key? Or something like that. Or you've got time flowing on and you're doing some process every few seconds, then you'll be using the update method. Okay, now for this fixed rotation 2D, let's just write in here player agent dot update position. No, it's update rotation is going to be equal to false. Okay, so now our method has its first instruction in it, and this is just something that's required to stop the agent from disappearing. Player agent dot update up axes is equal to false, because it's a 2D world. There is no such thing as these things. So somehow it's causing a trouble, and we're just fixing it manually like that. So fix rotation 2D. Now I'm actually calling the method, and I'll save that. So if I go ahead, so this is my actual instructions, and then I'm calling it when the script actually gets initialized, so when it starts up. Okay, and if I hit play, then in that case our player will stay there. And there you go, you can see that the player is there, so that's great. So now we obviously want to move somewhere when we click, right? So let's go and do that. So I'm going to just make another method here called void get mouse click position and try to move. Okay, can name it anything. And in this method, I'm going to say if input dot get mouse button down, assign the 0 button, which is left click, then we are going to do something. So that's how you write an if statement. And I just know from experience that there's this class called input class, and within it you can do things like let's just put here, like you can do input dot get key down, you can do input dot get button down, and you can define things like that within Unity. So if you go to your edit, I think it was project settings, your input, there we go, input manager, your axes, and these are all defined button names, so you can actually call it by button name. So you can always go check out the Unity API and actually have a look how to use that. It's quite basic, quite simple. But anyway, this is one of the input things that I'm using. So I'm just checking if the player is pressing their left mouse button. And when the player presses their left mouse button, I just want to find out, I just want to know where did they click in the world, right? So where did they click? So I'm just going to take vector3, and I'm going to just call this mouse position. So this is a variable. I'm making up a variable on the fly, basically. it's of the type vector3. I just know that because the Unity is a 3D world, so the Navmesh system still uses things in 3D. It will work if I say vector2 mouse position, and then what I'm about to write, if I write the rest of that, it will work, but then I have to convert it to vector3 anyway, so I'm not going to do that. I'll just start with a vector3. And to get that mouse click position, I'm going to say camera dot main dot screen to world point, and it needs something. I have to pass in a vector3 position, so I'm going to give it input dot mouse position. Okay, and then you have to put a I forgot to mention, when you have a line of code as an instruction at the end in C#, you just have to put a semicolon at the end of it. But in this case, this is like an if statement or a method. Like for the method, you just have to write these round brackets. I mean, it's just what it is. And so I guess just looking back at this, so we've made this variable on the spot called mouse position, and then it's going to use this class called camera. It's actually camera.main is actually going to find, so it's actually going to find our main camera in the scene. It will find that. It's got a tag main camera as well. So it's just some built-in logic here, just some built-in functionality to make things easier for us. And dot screen to world point. So it's going to transform a point from the screen space to world space. And that's basically what I want. So I want to know, so screen space is basically pixels in X and Y. I can't remember where 0 starts and whether it's from the bottom or the top, but screen space has a different coordinate system to the 3D world space. So you'll have to convert between the two. I guess if you're thinking in 3D, then you also have to use like raycasts and stuff to try and figure out where did the player click in the 3D world. But this is 2D, it's a lot simpler. I just need to take the mouse position and convert that into a vector3. And all I need to do now is to say player agent dot set destination. So this is a functionality within the AI system, so the Navmesh, it's under Navmesh agent. So I'm now giving it a destination, and that is mouse position. Okay, that's very good. Now, if I try to run this code, I've got this method here. It looks great and all. Yeah, I've got this that is looking for a mouse button click and all that. If I run the game now, will it work? So how about I go there, and I'm going to run the game. Okay, if I click, nothing happens. Well, that's because I have to call the method, right? So I have to come back here, and it's telling me it's not getting called because it's sort of grayed out in Visual Studio. It's helping me. So I just need to call it an update. So get mouse click position and try to move. So now every frame, the game is going to check if the player is doing this action. And if they are, then try to move the player to that. And this just does a whole lot of work for us. It's automatically causing that Navmesh agent to just interact with the Navmesh, which is fantastic and makes our life easy. So you can see it's a very short script, and we're going to come in here, going to hit play, and just move the player around. Great, and now the player is moving. If I just click the navigation tab, I can see the nav mesh in the scene view, and I can just click in the game view and see, look, the player is interacting nicely with our Navmesh. And they're just going to take whatever path is easiest for them to navigate around. Great. Now, the other problem is the camera is not following around. But there's something else I'd like to sort out here and now before we go much further. So if I stop that, if I added a UI, for example, let's add a UI. Going to add a canvas. I want to get rid of this. It added an event system. Leave that alone. Leave the event system there. You'll need that anyway later for the UI. It adds it automatically. If I add a panel, for example, now I've got a UI panel added into the game. I'm just going to change its size. I'm going to just select a center type of pivot and press Alt as well to shift it there. And I'm just going to change the width to 300, for example. And what I want to show is that if I click on the UI, the player begins to move. Now imagine you have a menu or something, like you don't want that behavior. Like, for example, if you're pressing some buttons on a UI, the player's going to move there. Because, I mean, after all, the script is just looking for the player's mouse click position and converting it to a world space. It doesn't care that there's some UI thing here. So now let's make it care. So let's go back to our script. And to make it recognize the UI, we're going to use something called using Unity Engine.Event Systems. And this is basically going to refer to this event system here. This is the thing that sort of does like some raycasting and whatnot. It's seeing what the player is doing when they click and so on. It's what allows you to interact with the UI. So you can't delete this thing ever. And if you do, it's going to just throw up tons of errors anyway. When you have like this script that's going to be asking for it. So now that I've added that in using Unity Engine.Event Systems. So if I say if event system dot current dot is pointer over game object, I'll just have to close it like that. Then I'm going to just return. Return means just jump out of this method. Just get out of here. Don't execute the rest of this. Now, if it weren't of the type void and we were an int or something, then we would return something back out of the method, and whatever other method is calling it will get that value. We'll be able to extract that value from the method that we executed. But in this case, I'm just going to just return nothing and just jump out of here, because I'm saying what this is saying. The event system. It is when we basically left click. It's not even left click. It's just simply that basically there's the mouse cursor over a UI game object. It is actually talking about a UI game object here. I mean, it could have been worded, could have been named a bit better so that we would all understand what exactly it's talking about. But I suppose that's what it is. I mean, once you know what it is, you just start using the code. Now, perhaps this, if you're really new to coding, yeah, it perhaps may not make a lot of sense to you. You know, what are these big green things? What are these smaller? Why are some things lowercase? Why are some things uppercase? Now, of course, I just defined it as lowercase to tell myself it's just a variable, just my own convention, I guess, commonly used. And these are, of course, actual inbuilt variables and stuff. Now, this sort of stuff, it doesn't really make a lot of sense anyway, unless you're deeply technical and you have a lot of knowledge of this sort of stuff, what's happening in the background. And I don't know, I guess the way I can explain it, I mean, for me, myself, when I was learning coding, it took me ages, it took me a long time, probably like a year, for me to really understand what exactly I'm doing in a script. The way I learned was I just kept writing it, just like how you're watching this tutorial. Back then, there were a lot fewer tutorials, but I would read books and stuff as well. I just basically just kept writing code, following along, and then just one day it just sort of clicked and things started to make a whole heap of sense to me, and now I just sort of code and don't even think about it. And that's why I might actually struggle sometimes to explain what exactly I'm doing, but I just don't know anymore. I just do it because I know it works, and that's what I'm doing. So anyway, that's our script pretty much done. So if I come back here and hit play, you'll now find that great. Yay, when you click, the player's not moving wherever there's an UI, but where there's no UI, yeah, it'll respond and the player will go there. Fantastic. Now, if I, for example, just turn this off for a moment, yeah, there you see null reference errors appearing in the hundreds there, and that is because it's telling us where it's finding a problem. So, for example, I'll just turn this off. And when an error appears like that, don't be alarmed. It's especially null reference exception. It's basically it just can't find something. So you go and help it find it. And in this case was simple because I was being silly and turned off the event system. Just double click the error. It'll go to the line where it's struggling and it can't find that thing. And in this case, what it couldn't find is this current, the event system.current, because I disabled the game object. I'm like, where is it? So then it's going to throw an error when that happens, that it can't find it. So going back, I guess I'm going to just get rid of the canvas now. I'm going to leave the event system since our code looks for it now, and just save it. And we're going to have a UI anyway later. Okay, now I'm going to set up Cinemachine to get our camera to follow the player. So I'm just going to do right click in the hierarchy, Cinemachine, virtual camera. Okay, it'll create a virtual camera. And it's also going to create a brain component for our main camera. So on this object here, I'm just going to add the player as the follow target. So now, yeah, it's moved the camera to look at the player. The next thing that I need to do is it won't work. So if I hit play right now and I try clicking somewhere, I can't even move the player. I won't even be able to move the player. So for whatever reason, it interferes. So aim, I don't have a look at target. I guess it's not a 3D world as such. I still don't think it's going to work. It likes the third person follow body mode. So if I click, nothing is going to happen. That's okay. So in that case, I'll switch it to third person follow, and you might have to play with the camera distance. It is dependent on your camera. If you see this, it's changed to -2. If I change it to like 5, for example, it's going to go to -5. I guess whatever you do, don't just make it too high up. I mean, go too far back, so otherwise it won't work. So if you go to like 10, I think it'll stop working. And now if I click around, yeah, okay, so there we go. The camera is basically following the player around. So let's maximize that so we can see what we're doing. That's pretty good. Oh, what's this black patch here? I think I haven't painted that place with any grass for whatever reason. I've missed that. Oh, that's no good. I'm gonna go fix that right away, and just get my grass painting here. So I have got the correct tile map selected. Just that random brush again, and fortunately it's still set up from last time. So I'll just go ahead and paint this right there. Done. Filled in. Okay, so just get rid of that. So I guess that's it for this. I just wanted to mention though that this can be a bit sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes it does. So you may be following along and it doesn't want to work for whatever reason. I think it's still got maybe a few little bugs in there. Sometimes you have to set it to do nothing. If you find that it's still not working, sometimes you have to actually set it to do nothing, and then it's going to work. I think in my case it won't, but I have found previously when I've used it that, yeah, I've had to actually set it to do nothing, and then the camera would start following. I have no idea why. But anyway, I'll just set this back to third person follow, and then hit that play button again, and it should be working fine now. So yeah, that's pretty good. So that's just something to keep in mind. It can be a little bit funny, this thing. It doesn't always work how you might expect it to work. So I just want to just point that out. If that happens, try fiddling around with it. Try setting it to do nothing. Just be careful about the camera distance too. Keep it some distance away, but not too far away. Otherwise it will stop working. And I guess that's it. So we've set up our player. We wrote our first script as well, so I've written that first script player mover to move the player in the Navmesh. We set up the Navmesh, and the camera set up as well, so very good. In the next video, I'll probably make a start on time and day and night as well, changing the color of the light based on the time of day. So yeah, I guess I'll see you in the next video.